I was asked this morning to sort of kick off the meeting by giving a review of the history of EarthScope. And when I was asked to do this, I was initially actually a bit intimidated because this is actually a very, very daunting task. So I went back to the organizers and I asked for a little bit more specificity before deciding whether I would do this or not. And this is kind of the answer that I got. And I thought to myself, oh, that narrows it down quite a bit. Okay, no problem. I can do that in 20 minutes. Not a problem. So here we go. So before stepping back and looking at how we got to where we are, I thought it was worth it to take a few moments and sort of reflect on where we are. So this is a map that probably people have seen a lot of times, and you know, maybe don't think a lot about it. It's a lot of dots on the map, but it is worthwhile to think about what each one of these dots represents, the amount of effort that has gone into each dot on this map, the amount of resources, the investment in terms of dollars, people, hours. It's really an incredible accomplishment when you think about it. And EarthScope is a remarkable accomplishment. If you think about it in terms of our community, it is changing the way we do science. It's changing our view of how the continent is structured, the dynamic processes that control it and have had it evolve over time. It's also a remarkable accomplishment for the way it is engaging our community in science and the way it is touching large numbers of people, engaging the public and students in science. This is a very brief collage of science results. We've had a lot of meetings, a lot of papers being published. This is just a few images that come off of the websites of PBO and US Array and EarthScope. So EarthScope is really changing the way we do science and fundamentally changing our view of the continent. But there's other ways to view EarthScope as well. And this is an image that comes from a project called Confluence. And the goal of Confluence is to visit and take a photograph of every degree of latitude and longitude around the globe. And so if you think of EarthScope as the dots on the map in this way, if you think about the places we've been and the people we've touched, it's really quite remarkable. And if you think about the accomplishments in terms of the development of instrumentation and infrastructure that's taken place to make EarthScope a reality, and the great thanks that we owe to the professional staff that have been implementing this grand vision. Again, the number of people hours involved and people who are held accountable for this project in ways that the science community might not always actually recognize. We owe them a great deal of thanks. In addition, science, first and foremost, is about people. And so if you reflect on the accomplishments of EarthScope in terms of the way it has brought us together as a science community, as an earth science community, and if you think about it in terms of the way it has engaged the public in science and in doing science, and the way it has the opportunity to keep students attracted to science in ways and at a scale which was really unprecedented when the project began. It is truly remarkable. So it is worth reflecting on this success for a moment before we look back. But my task is to look back, and so that's what I'll do. And I think when I put up this image, the first thing that might occur to you is over time we've improved our ability to produce graphics. But if you go back, before there was EarthScope, these were the kinds of graphics that were developed to begin to explore these concepts. And EarthScope began as three very separate ideas from three different communities. And these communities had unique characteristics. They had different approaches and styles of doing science, different ways about thinking about the Earth and the questions that they asked. And so EarthScope, before EarthScope, was actually three very separate initiatives coming forward from three different communities. And these were merged into one called EarthScope. And standing here today, if you look back it might seem well obvious, like why wouldn't you combine these things into one initiative? But at the time, it wasn't that obvious at all. And that idea to merge these into one didn't necessarily come exactly from those three separate communities. It came from an ongoing dialogue between members of the community and collaborative partners at the NSF, where the NSF was in the process of some really important and engaged strategic thinking and strategic planning. And it was really that kind of interaction between these different separate community initiatives and the NSF, which ultimately gave rise to EarthScope. But if you go back to that moment in time, these were not integrated communities. It was not a single community. And there was a little bit of angst and maybe a little degree of suspicion as well, because what was really going on at that time? We had a geodetic community with a lot of disparate facilities and networks for making measurements, and they were struggling with how do we sustain these kinds of initiatives, because we need long-term permanent observatories. And then there was this U.S. array thing. What is this thing? It's moving across the country. It's a lot of dots on a map. It kind of looks like the country's got measles. Then you've got this hole in the ground. And how do you take something that's permanent and sort of West Coast-ish with something that is embracing the whole continent and something that's in one spot? And how do you actually bring these together? And so at the time that EarthScope actually originated and was put together as a single concept, there was some confusion in the community about what this meant. How could we work together? How could these disparate things actually become one thing? Some people kind of got it, right off the bat. Other people were like, I'm really not so sure about this. Some people were upset and not particularly happy, but the conversation started happening and people started dialoguing. So I'm going to play a short video for you now that I've downloaded from YouTube that I think actually captures that moment in time, because we were at a critical juncture as a community. We needed to come together. We needed to get behind a single idea, a shared vision, and we needed to speak with one voice. And so this is a YouTube video. It's about a minute long, and I have to acknowledge John Delaney for reintroducing me to this. It's a commercial by EDS, and it was produced for the Super Bowl at about the time that EarthScope was coming together.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, You
see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
EDS, managing the complexities of e-business.
So I really do think that captures what it was like at the time. But we were very fortunate because we actually had wranglers, and we had enough of them, and we had really good ones, and so they actually did bring the community together. Our tribes, our disparate tribes, came together, and we got behind this thing called EarthScope, and we found a way to take these disparate ideas and actually bring them under a common umbrella and structure this as a new view into the Earth, a science and a facilities program as a way to look at the structure and dynamics of the North American continent. But that's not the end of the story. What had to happen at that point, once we had this common idea and this umbrella to put these things under, is there was a lot of work involved. So there were workshops, there were committees, there were written documents, there were white papers, there were project plans or science plans. There were articles that were published, in EOS and GSA Today to build a community and to move beyond just geophysical observatories, but to put these in the context of service to the broader Earth science community. And this is a very important time. This is community-driven. Lots of volunteers put in countless hours to make this happen. And these were people who didn't necessarily view themselves as necessarily even perhaps doing EarthScope Science or submitting proposals or being funded by EarthScope. These were people who saw an opportunity to do something substantially different, and they came together and put in the effort that was required to do this, working very much hand in glove with the NSF at the time. And the whole project had to go through a whole series of substantial reviews, both within the NSF and by external bodies outside of the NSF. In total, if you reflect back on this beginning time, it took us 8 years from the spark, the first ideas being discussed within the communities to what I'll call ignition in context of the theme of this meeting. So there were several years where the concepts were being discussed and developed. Then there were several years with very engaged discussions with the NSF and the formation of structures to actually begin to move this forward. Had to go through review, approval by the National Science Board, and then it had to go through a budget process. And so it took several years in order for this project to get funded. The facilities are of a scale that they had to go through a process, the MREFC process, which is a line item in the congressional budget and has to be approved by Congress. So there had to be communication, education, outreach to Congress about what was this thing and why should taxpayer dollars be invested to do this. And it took several years before, in fact, funding was approved for this initiative. So substantial amount of time and effort to get to this point. So what makes EarthScope really substantially different from something that had been done before at the time? One aspect of it is that it actually separated out facilities from science. And so the facilities went through this MREFC process for the funding. What else made it different and unique at the time? We were proposing to collect these high-resolution synoptic data sets at the scale of a plate. And these facilities we were proposing were going to be, and are, community-run. They are distributed. This was a unique concept for this MREFC project. They're distributed across the whole nation. They're delivering data in real time, open to anyone. The EarthScope Science, okay, again, putting this together in terms of conceptually what was needed, funding through a peer review process. So no entitlement. Science gets funded through the peer review process, through a mechanism that allows individuals to participate, groups of individuals to participate, and addressed a suite of questions that really broadly captured a lot of the major earth science questions that the community was dealing with. But not just basic research, also took it down through to science that is relevant to society. But more than science, EarthScope was also about, from the very beginning, expanding the culture of shared and coordinated resources within the earth sciences. It was designed to engage a broad spectrum of colleges and universities across the whole nation. And embedded in it from the start was a desire to improve science education, science literacy, and engage the public in science and to raise the profile of the earth sciences. So this was all part of the original concept of EarthScope from the beginning. And I think most importantly, it was about exploration and discovery, because that is how you engage the public in science, and that's how you keep kids attracted to science, right? Every kid likes science. Somewhere along the way, that spark is lost, and I think we bear some responsibility for that. This kind of a project was our opportunity to really keep kids attracted to science. So what else did it take? What lessons can we learn? Partnerships. Tons of partnerships were critical and are critical to the success of EarthScope. So a lot of different engagement. But I'm going to highlight 3 special partnerships, or 3 separate special entities and organizations as part of this partnership. And this is not meant to at all not acknowledge the other parts, but I think this partnership was critical. And when I put IRIS and UNAVCO up here, I'm actually talking about the consortiums in their full breadth as academic consortiums. Very powerful because they have the potential and ability to convene people and to make decisions because they have a governance structure. And those decisions are not ad hoc decisions. There's actually a process for bringing the community together and making decisions. At the time, these consortium had a very strong record for their management of large facilities. And I think that record is now beyond a shadow of a doubt when you look at where we are with EarthScope, critical to the success. But then there's the NSF, and really the consortiums and NSF, they were like this in developing EarthScope. This was a true collaboration and a true partnership with leadership at the NSF that worked with the community to help guide us and to make this happen. And the other aspect of these relationships that were critical to success is trust and respect, because these are the fundamental foundations of any true collaboration. Okay, so that's a brief history, and so here's where we are today. Now, EarthScope didn't start because we wanted to do something big. It started because we needed to do something different in order to answer the questions that were important to our science. That's what motivated EarthScope. And as we think about what will motivate these kinds of projects in the future, there are a number of different things that we need to think about. And we need to think not only of good ideas, that's actually the easy part. There's going to be more than enough good ideas. You need to think of how you build consensus and how you engage support from the public, because that is essential to doing these kinds of initiatives. And you really need to think through how do you balance facilities and research and science. And you need to think through how do you organize and manage these kinds of things? How do you sustain something for basically a quarter of a century? For many of you in this room, EarthScope's always existed. But how do you sustain an initiative for a quarter of a century? Not an easy thing to do. We do have places to start from. There have been a number of recent reports. These are just a couple. There are many others that again try to look at what are the grand challenges that we face as an earth science community. And today and tomorrow, at this workshop, we're going to have lots of opportunities to hear really exciting ideas about what might drive our science forward. But we're going to need to focus at some point, and we're going to need to build consensus around some core ideas, and we're going to need to figure out how are we going to sustain any kind of a new initiative that we want to do. And it can be very hard to focus because people are very busy and have very many demands on their time. In thinking about what we want to do, in addition to EarthScope, it's critical that we be aspirational. We need to stretch, we need to challenge ourselves, we need to reach for something that is actually beyond our capabilities right now, but something that we can conceive of. We need to think about not just what do we want, but why do we want it? And we need to think about not just what can we do, but why should we do it? And we really need to think about, if we are successful, ultimately, what difference would it make? So going through this process, what are some of the key components that have to come together? There ultimately has to be consensus. The community needs to come together. There's got to be commitment, okay? People have to be in this for the long haul to see it through. It's got to be continuity. As a community, I think we need to be responsible in terms of what we ask for. If we're asking for taxpayer dollars to fund something that we're going to do, and then we need to be accountable to see it through. We can't get halfway through and go, oh, not such a good idea, it kind of changed our minds. You really got to be accountable, you got to see it through. It has to be something that's going to be impactful, not just for our science community, but beyond the science community. And more than anything, it's got to be exciting, it's got to be inspirational, it's got to capture the imagination of the public. The other thing that's really important is that we finish EarthScope. Okay, so if we're going to talk about things that we want to do next, people will judge us on what we've done with EarthScope. And so it's very important that while we think about the next thing, we also think about this thing, and that we actually complete the project, and that we deliver on the process. So, you know, we've got lots of good stuff from the western U.S., stuff's coming out from the central U.S. The science obviously kind of lags behind where the transportable array is moving, at least in terms of U.S. array. We've got the East Coast to look at. We've got Alaska coming up. Those are all really important for the community to stay engaged and invested in. And then we've got to take a step back, and we've got to integrate the data we've been collecting and the individual pieces of sciences we're doing. We've said that we're trying to look at processes and structure on a continental scale. So in the 5+ years that EarthScope has left, we really need to be challenging ourselves to begin that integration. We're not finished yet, so more data is going to be coming in, but we need to begin to be thinking, you know, how does all this integrate? What have we learned about plate scale processes and the structure of a continent? So we really need to deliver on the promise as well. So thanks.